3. As Larry Square, the memory specialist, spent more and more time with Eugene, he became convinced his patient was somehow learning new behaviors. Images of Eugene's brain showed that his basal ganglia had escaped injury from the viral encephalitis. Was it possible, the scientist wondered, that Eugene, even with severe brain damage, could still use the cue routine reward loop? Could this ancient neurological process explain how Eugene was able to walk around the block and find the jar of nuts in the kitchen? To test if Eugene was forming new habits, Square devised an experiment. He took 16 different objects, bits of plastic and brightly colored pieces of toys, and glued them to cardboard rectangles. He then divided them into 8 pairs, choice A and choice B. In each pairing, one piece of cardboard chosen at random had a sticker placed on the bottom that read correct. Eugene was seated at a table, given a pair of objects and asked to choose one. Next, he was told to turn over his choice to see if there was a correct sticker underneath. This is a common way to measure memory. Since there are only 16 objects and they are always presented in the same 8 pairings, most people can memorize which item is correct after a few rounds. Monkeys can memorize all the correct items after 8 to 10 days. Eugene couldn't remember any of the correct items no matter how many times he did the test. He repeated the experiment twice a week for months, looking at 40 pairings each day. "Do you know why you're here today?" a researcher asked at the beginning of one session a few weeks into the experiment. "I don't think so," Eugene said. "I'm going to show you some objects. Do you know why? Am I supposed to describe them to you or tell you what they are used for?" Eugene couldn't recollect the previous sessions at all. But as the weeks passed, Eugene's performance improved. After 28 days of training, Eugene was choosing the correct object 85% of the time. At 36 days, he was right 95% of the time. After one test, Eugene looked at the researcher, bewildered by his success. "How am I doing this?" he asked her. "Tell me what is going on in your head," the researcher said. "Do you say to yourself, 'I remember seeing that one'?" "No," Eugene said. "It's here somehow or another," he pointed to his head, "and the hand goes for it." To Square, however, it made perfect sense. Eugene was exposed to a cue, a pair of objects always presented in the same combination. There was a routine. He could choose one object and look to see if there was a sticker underneath, even if he had no idea why he felt compelled to turn the cardboard over. Then there was a reward, the satisfaction he received after finding a sticker proclaiming correct. Eventually, a habit loop emerged. To make sure this pattern was in fact a habit, Square conducted one more experiment. He took all 16 items and put them in front of Eugene at the same time. He asked him to put all the correct objects into one pile. Eugene had no idea where to begin. "Gosh sakes, how to remember this?" he asked. He reached for one object and started to turn it over. The experimenter stopped him. "No," she explained. "The task was to put the items in piles. Why was he trying to turn them over?" "That's just a habit, I think," he said. He couldn't do it. The objects, when presented outside of the context of the habit loop, made no sense to him. Here was the proof Square was looking for. The experiments demonstrated that Eugene had the ability to form new habits even when they involved tasks or objects he couldn't remember for more than a few seconds. This explained how Eugene managed to go for a walk every morning. The cues, certain trees on corners, or the placement of particular mailboxes were consistent every time he went outside. So though he couldn't recognize his house, his habits always guided him back to his front door. It also explained why Eugene would eat breakfast 3 or 4 times a day even if he wasn't hungry. As long as the right cues were present, such as his radio or the morning light through his windows, he automatically followed the script dictated by his basal ganglia. What's more, there were dozens of other habits in Eugene's life that no one noticed until they started looking for them. Eugene's daughter, for instance, would often stop by his house to say hello. She would talk to her father in the living room for a bit, then go into the kitchen to visit with her mother and then leave, waving goodbye on her way out the door. Eugene, who had forgotten their earlier conversation by the time she left, would get angry. Why was she leaving without chatting? And then forget why he was upset. But the emotional habit had already started, and so his anger would persist, red hot and beyond his understanding, until it burned itself out. Sometimes he would bang the table or curse, and if you asked him why, he would say, "I don't know, but I'm mad, Beverly told me." He would kick his chair or snap at whoever came into the room. Then, a few minutes later, he would smile and talk about the weather. It was like once he started, he had to finish the frustration, she said. Square's new experiment also showed something else, that habits are surprisingly delicate. If Eugene's cues changed the slightest bit, his habits fell apart. The few times he walked around the block, for instance, and something was different, the city was doing street repairs or a windstorm had blown branches all over the sidewalk, Eugene would get lost no matter how close he was to home, until a kind neighbor showed him the way to his door. If his daughter stopped to chat with him for 10 seconds before she walked out, his anger habit never emerged. Square's experiments with Eugene revolutionized the scientific community's understanding of how the brain works by proving once and for all that it's possible to learn and make unconscious choices without remembering anything about the lesson or decision making. Eugene showed that habits, as much as memory and reason, are the root of how we behave. We might not remember the experiences that create our habits, but once they are lodged within our brains, they influence how we act, often without our realization. Since Square's first paper on Eugene's habits was published, the science of habit formation has exploded into a major field of study. Researchers at Duke, Harvard, UCLA, Yale, USC, Princeton, the University of Pennsylvania, and at schools in the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Netherlands, as well as corporate scientists working for Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, Google, and hundreds of other companies, are focused on understanding the neurology and psychology of habits, their strengths and weaknesses, and why they emerge and how they can be changed. Researchers have learned that cues can be almost anything, from a visual trigger such as a candy bar or a television commercial to a certain place, a time of day, an emotion, a sequence of thoughts, or the company of particular people. Routines can be incredibly complex or fantastically simple. Some habits, such as those related to emotions, are measured in milliseconds. Rewards can range from food or drugs that cause physical sensations to emotional payoffs, such as the feeling of pride that accompany praise or self-congratulation. And in almost every experiment, researchers have seen echoes of Square's discoveries with Eugene. Habits are powerful but delicate. They can emerge outside our consciousness or can be deliberately designed. They often occur without our permission, but can be reshaped by fiddling with their parts. They shape our lives far more than we realize. They are so strong, in fact, that they cause our brains to cling to them at the exclusion of all else, including common sense. In one set of experiments, for example, researchers affiliated with the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism trained mice to press levers in response to certain cues until the behavior became a habit. The mice were always rewarded with food. Then the scientists poisoned the food so that it made the animals violently ill or electrified the floor, so that when the mice walked toward the reward, they received a shock. The mice knew the food and cage were dangerous. When they were offered the poisoned pellets in a bowl or saw the electrified floor panels, they stayed away. When they saw their old cues, however, they unthinkingly pressed the lever and ate the food, or they walked across the floor even as they vomited or jumped from the electricity. The habit was so ingrained, the mice couldn't stop themselves. It's not hard to find an analog in the human world. Consider fast food, for instance. It makes sense when the kids are starving and you're driving home after a long day, to stop just this once at McDonald's or Burger King. The meals are inexpensive, it tastes so good. After all, one dose of processed meat, salty fries, and sugary soda possesses a relatively small health
emerge
risk,
without
right?
our permission.
It's not like you
Studies
do it all the
indicate that
time.
families usually don't intend to
habits
eat
emerge
fast food
without
on
our
a regular
permission.
basis. What
Studies
happens is
indicate
that
that
families
once a
usually
month pattern
don't
slowly
intend to
becomes
eat
once a
fast
week
food on a regular
and then
basis.
twice a week.
What happens
As the
is
cues
that
and
a
rewards
once a
create
month
a
pattern
habit
slowly
until the
becomes
kids are
once a
consuming
week
an
and
unhealthy
then
amount of
twice a week.
hamburgers and
As the
fries.
cues and rewards
When
create a
researchers
habit
at the
until the
University
kids are
of North
consuming
Texas
an
and Yale
unhealthy
tried
amount
to
of
understand
hamburgers
why
and
families
fries gradually
when
increase their
researchers
fast food
at the
consumption,
University of
they
North
found a
Texas
series
and
of
Yale
cues
tried
and
to
rewards
understand
that
why
most
families
consumers
gradually increase their
never
fast
knew
food
were
consumption.
influencing their
They found a
behaviors.
series of
They
cues and
discovered the
rewards
habit
that
loop. Most consumers
every McDonald's,
never
for
knew were
instance, looks
influencing
the
their
same.
behaviors.
The company
They
deliberately
discovered the
tries to
habit loop.
standardize stores' architecture
Every
and what
McDonald's, for
employees say
instance,
to
looks the same.
customers.
The
So
company
everything is a
deliberately
consistent
tries to
cue to
standardize
trigger
stores'
eating
architecture
routines.
and what
The
employees
foods
say to
at some
customers.
chains are
So
specifically
everything is a
engineered to
consistent
deliver
cue to trigger
immediate
eating
rewards.
routines.
The fries, for
The foods
instance,
at
are
some
designed
chains
to
are
begin
specifically engineered to
disintegrating the
deliver
moment they
immediate
hit your tongue.
rewards.
In
The
order to
fries, for
deliver a
instance,
hit
are
of
designed
salt
to
and
begin
grease as fast as
disintegrating
possible,
the moment
causing
they
your
hit your
pleasure
tongue.
centers
In
to
order
light
to
up and
deliver
your
a hit
brain
of salt
to
and
lock in the
grease
pattern.
as fast as possible,
All the better for
causing your
tightening the
pleasure
habit
centers
to light up and your brain to lock in the pattern. All the better for tightening the habit loop. However, even these habits are delicate. When a fast food restaurant closes down, the families that previously ate there will often start having dinner at home rather than seek out an alternative location. Even small shifts can end the pattern. But since we often don't recognize these habit loops as they grow, we are blind to our ability to control them. By learning to observe the cues and rewards, though, we can change the routines.